Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. This is a podcast to help you find peace with food and overcome disordered eating. And I'm Harriet Frew, aka the Eating Disorder Therapist. And I'm so excited to share with you all kinds of stories, tips, information and guest interviews to help you on your journey in finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. Now, today I'm talking to Julia Trehane, a returning guest to the podcast, who is an anorexia, orthorexia and compulsive eating recovery coach. Julia has overcome 40 years gripped by eating disorders and is now passionate about instilling hope for change in others. Julia is a podcast host, eating disorder coach, food freedom advocate and anti-diet culture campaigner. Julia uses her wealth of scientific understanding applied with a huge amount of love to help people all around the world to break free from eating disorders and love themselves once more. So having survived 40 years of anorexia, orthorexia and exercise addiction, Julia has a deep understanding of how it feels to be gripped by food prison, how the mind processes information in an eating disorder and how to rewire our thoughts to break free and return to freedom forever. If you're feeling lost, stuck and hopeless, living in the depths of an eating disorder, this is definitely an episode for you. Julia shares about her long and arduous battle with eating disorders, talking candidly about the reality of recovery. She explains the challenges of eating more and the body changes accompanying this. She talks about how she navigated this challenging process, not only managing food and body image, but the tumultuous journey of engaging with emotions, finding identity and the impact on her closest relationships. You'll be encouraged, supported and inspired by what is possible in recovery. Let's get to the conversation. Time for a short advertisement break. I can remember crying in the doctor's surgery 4 years into living with bulimia. I was desperate for help and wanted support to escape the torturous cycle of restriction, binge eating and purging. My face was swollen, my stomach ached and I felt lonely and desperate. And I was told that the local ED service had closed and there was no help available. I left dejected and lost, and it wasn't until 2 years later, when out in Australia, still struggling with the illness, that I made the decision to support others in the way that I had not been supported. I decided that I would train as a counsellor and support others in eating disorder recovery, and at age 25 years old, I began this process. Starting in the NHS eating disorder service and in private practice later in my 20s, I was able to put my dream into reality. Seeing clients, families, teaching, and in more recent years, social media, blogging, podcasting, training, and supervising counsellors, I continue to be incredibly passionate about my work. So my latest offering is my Breaking Free from Bulimia online course. It's a 12-step breaking free course packed full of valuable tools and strategies to help you break free. You'll start with understanding and making sense of your past and why you're struggling. You'll then work on motivation to change and root out the ambivalence and fear of letting go. You'll dive into the destructive impact of diet culture and get firmly in your own recovery lane. You'll practice regular eating and stabilising blood sugar levels to create a strong baseline for recovery, and you'll interrupt the binge and purge cycle. And with support, you'll introduce your old forbidden foods and practice self-compassion techniques to become much kinder and supportive of yourself. You'll work on emotional eating and challenging your negative thoughts. And there's modules on finding your voice, becoming assertive, plus developing robust self-esteem and managing relapse with ease and continuing on the recovery road. So 12 modules, self-paced, online, delivered in lecture and video content by me, Harriet Frew, expert by experience, having recovered myself from bulimia and having worked in the NHS and private practice with clients with eating disorders for 20 years. So step into freedom with food now and live the life you want. It's only £111, which is really, really great value. No more restrictions, secret behaviours, shame and loneliness. Break free from bulimia today. Link is in the show notes. Hi, Julia. Thank you so much for coming back on the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast.
Hi, Harriet. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
So, Julia, for people that don't know you, because obviously you're very famous now in the eating disorder world, can you introduce yourself to the listeners, please?
Sure. My name's Julia Trehane, and I'm an eating disorder recovery coach, primarily helping people to recover from anorexia and other quite severely restrictive eating disorders. And I myself recovered from 40 years of living in anorexia, orthorexia, and exercise addiction to start actually living a life which is just incredible. I didn't realize how much I was missing out on. That inspired me to want to share that with people and want to help other people start living rather than just existing, because it's incredible.
Oh, it's so inspiring. 40 years. I know so many people contact me and say, oh, I've been struggling for so long. I'm just resigned to it now. I'm never going to be able to change. But I think, Julia, you are waving the flag, aren't you, for recovery and what is possible?
Yes. And it is amazing how many people out there are just existing day to day in a kind of Groundhog Day of they think this is it. They're too old, or they've been in it too long, or they're surviving, they're getting by, but they're not actually living. And I thought that for so long. I really did. I didn't think that anything would happen to change. And I didn't think it was possible until it was. And I just wanted to share that message with everybody that you don't have to just stay stuck. There is a future that can be free.
So, Julia, you've been on the podcast before last summer. I will make sure that I link that in the show notes because I'm sure a lot of people want to go back and listen to you talking about your recovery story. But we're going to talk a bit more about some of that today, aren't we? So I wanted you back. Julia, what I'm really interested to hear about is obviously before you started work with Victoria, the lovely Victoria Kleinsman, who we both love dearly in the field.
Certainly do.
From what I understand, that was a bit of a turning point. You signed up to work with Victoria and you were really stepping in to recovery. But I'm wondering, had you sort of tried to recover many times before or not?
Oh, okay. So that's a yes and no answer. I was very aware that I was living in a restricted life, but I kept telling myself I was okay. And I kept looking for things that would make me feel better. I tried lots of things like different diets, buying lots of clothes, all sorts of things to try and make myself happy, to try and fill the hole, the thing that wasn't working. And I just literally looked for every route around facing my fear possible, which a lot of people do. Because who wants to face the fear? It's uncomfortable, it's scary, it's hard. Yes, I did look at different ways of trying to recover, but still restricting at the same time and trying to recover and staying in the sick body, the small body, because pretty much everybody else in an eating disorder, of course, I didn't want to gain weight. It terrified me. Yeah, I had a couple of therapists I tried working with, and one of them wasn't specialized in eating disorders and quite frankly told me after a few sessions that there was nothing they could do to help me, that I needed somebody that was specialized. Another one was lovely and very gentle and probably what I needed at the time, but allowed me to live in my excuses without taking any actions. Whilst that felt really great, because it felt like I was sort of taking actions without taking any actions, it wasn't serving me in any way, shape, or form. I had another recovery coach as well before Victoria, and she helped me work out what I needed to do. And I took some actions and then stepped back and then stepped forwards and then stepped back and kept on still trying to find ways around the pain, around facing my fears, around gaining weight. And I also researched. I thought, I'm a great researcher. I research everything. I mean, I probably know far more about nutrition than is needed in any form of daily life. I felt that that was taking actions, and it was arming myself with knowledge and giving myself excuses not to take action. I sort of did try recovery and I didn't. I thought about it a lot and gave myself lots of excuses not to take any actions.
Oh, well, thank you for your honesty there, because I think a lot of people listening will find that very relatable, because I think there's the fantasy, isn't there, that one day we wake up, we think, today is the day. I'm
Yes,
going to
I'll be
go off.
ready soon.
Yeah. But it's not like that, is it? I think this is very common for a lot of things when we're making changes in life and there's fear involved and we're really going to have to step out of our comfort zone. We often do dip our toe in the water quite a few times. And maybe at the time as well, it sounds like although those previous therapy relationships, they didn't really perhaps get you to the end goal, but they were probably all important stepping stones, weren't they, in the process?
Yes, I think so. I think I needed to show myself that there wasn't a magic wand, there wasn't a way round. I was much more an all or nothing person, a very black or white person, which again is very common for people with an eating disorder. And I needed to show myself that I'd exhausted every option, that I'd run out of excuses, I suppose.
Yeah, well, thanks for your honesty. And I think what you were talking as well about the kind of looking externally for like maybe trying this eating plan or trying new clothes, or I think that's something I know a lot of my clients talk about, seeking that external thing almost that's going to fix them. Something from outside is going to give them that reset. And I think because of diet culture, wellness culture, the world we live in, we do get a lot of information, don't we, that confirms that almost. You listen to a very reputable podcast and they have a nutritional expert on, and you can be led to believe really that if you start intermittent fasting, you're going to find nirvana. I think we do live in quite a black and white messaging around us with all the kind of information we're taking in. So I think it can be quite confusing, can't it? It sounds like for you as well that you knew something was not right, you knew you needed to change, but perhaps you didn't really appreciate the depths that you were in. Like now you're at the other side, you can look back, can't you? But probably at the time, you didn't see the wood for the trees probably fully, did you?
Absolutely, you're completely right. I thought I was quite sorted a lot of the time, but I thought that being put together and doing all the things that society says you should do, like the intermittent fasting, like the so-called clean eating, all the stuff that you're supposed to do to be healthy, like the exercise and all that. I did all that. And I believed, I think I truly believed that I was being healthy. I was helping myself, but I did it all to an extreme. Like, sure, it's not the most marvelous thing in the world for your body to eat food that makes you feel sluggish and tired and stuff. And having more of a balance is going to be much more beneficial to your body. That's not saying any foods are bad, because they're not, but you just need a balance. And I would go in with the clean eating turned into complete orthorexia, where I had to prepare everything from scratch. Nothing could be not organic, nothing could have been processed. And I just took everything to an extreme. And I think that's actually quite common.
Yeah, it sounds exhausting as well, doesn't it?
It was exhausting. But I didn't appreciate that either. I thought people told me that I was so good for being able to be on the go all the time and doing. And I completely forgot that I'm a human being, not a human doing.
So what brought you to the point before you sort of started working with Victoria? Because it sounds like you had a bit of sort of toe dipping, you realised things weren't quite right. But obviously, when you started working with Victoria, that was a bit of a shift had happened. Had something really got you to a point where you felt enough was enough?
Yeah, I'd felt enough was enough before working with the previous coach. I was really serious about recovery, but I was still looking for ways around facing the fear. And I wasn't doing any of the emotional work. It was all about rehabilitation nutritionally. But Victoria brought love into the equation. She showed me that self-compassion and self-love are such an important part. And I had never, ever considered that towards myself before. I was loving and compassionate, sure I was, to everybody else, but I hated myself quite vehemently. If I treated anybody else how I treated myself, I think I'd have been arrested. Yeah, it was seeing her, how she treated herself, and her giving me permission to be nice to myself was the real turning point. The telling me that all you need to be good enough is actually just to be a human being. That's the only qualification you need.
And do you think you were ready to hear that? Because I guess I'm thinking as well, some of the listeners, and I'm sure you pre-recovery, I felt very challenging to be nice to yourself.
Yeah.
You feel like, oh yeah, that's a nice thing to do. But then I think when we're so locked into being super critical, any niceness sometimes can feel a bit icky and repellent, can't it? It can just feel really unfamiliar.
Yes. Yeah. And it felt fake or just felt so wrong. But I had several alarm bells ring prior to that show was sort of highlighting how nasty I was to myself and how unfeeling I was to myself. One time at the gym, I'd done something, I can't remember what I'd done. I hadn't got a PB or I hadn't trained as hard as I wanted to. And I was putting myself down afterwards. And somebody else said, "Why are you doing that? Why are you being so mean to yourself?" And I went, "Doesn't everyone talk to themselves that way?" And she went, "No, that's horrible." And I was really shocked. I was really, really shocked because I thought everybody else did talk to themselves that way. And another time, two of my sons had girlfriends at the time, and they both complained to me that their girlfriends kept crying for all different reasons. And they said, "Mum, you never cry. Why do they cry all the time? That's just not normal." And I realized that I'd shown them a person that wasn't normal, that didn't feel emotions, didn't show emotions, and their girlfriends were just being human, and I wasn't. So I'd had a couple of, like, I suppose, red flags, alarms to say what you're doing isn't right. And people saying to me, "There's no need to be that mean to yourself." I guess that paved the way.
Yeah, it makes sense. It sounds like there were quite a few little sort of nudges and things happening, weren't there, in your life? It was all part of the glorious timing of things, I guess.
Yeah, everything happens when it's meant to happen, doesn't it?
Mm. So, Julia, I imagine as well, once you sort of started, you made that decision to recover. Did you do a kind of all-in journey or a more incremental one? Or how would you describe it? Because I think, again, it's not black and white, is it?
No, it's definitely not black and white. And so, yeah, it was initially with my first coach, it was incremental. I was at quite high risk of refeeding syndrome when I first started to actually eat. So that had to be taken slowly anyway, because it just did. And when I started working with Victoria, I was so determined and I just felt really connected to her as well. And she was so encouraging and compassionate that I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And as I said, I'm a very black and white thinker. I knew it was going to be really hard because I'd already been trying and it was hard. I definitely felt like I wanted to rip the plaster off rather than peel it really slowly, because I just felt that if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to put myself through all this stress and pain and anxiety and fear, I want it over as quickly as possible. So it was sort of like a self-protection thing of, right, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to go for it. And it was all in and it was hard, but it was possible.
So can you describe what it was like those first few weeks? Because I think it's something, isn't it, that a lot of people think a lot about and, oh, I think, should I do it? Should I not? So I guess what is the reality like of someone who has really been through that?
Okay. So after I'd got past the risk of refeeding syndrome and started to actually eat properly, I didn't have any hunger signals. I hadn't had for decades, actually, or not that I was aware of anyway. Obviously, the thinking about food constantly was a hunger signal, but I didn't link that. I started to eat 3 meals and 3 snacks a day. I had this complete blindness as to what I should eat. I didn't fancy anything. I didn't know what I wanted. I knew that if I had carried on eating safe foods, that wasn't facing fears, and I wasn't going to change unless I changed something. I started, first of all, which was actually at Victoria's suggestion, I started eating foods that I'd enjoyed as a child, which mainly consisted of Marmite sandwiches, bacon frazzles, beans and chips, and all sorts of real childhood food. And that was actually a brilliant suggestion and a really great introduction to nourishing myself and eating fear foods, because although they were really scary, they had like a comfortable familiarity about them as well, because they were part of my childhood and had felt safe at one point in my life. I started to eat, as I said, 3 meals and 3 snacks. I stopped exercise, like stopped everything, even walking the dogs, because my walking was very, very obsessive. Even my older dog used to look at me as if to say, I don't want to come out with you. I'm tired, which I feel so sad for now, but she's doing really well. She's fine. I stopped everything, and I thought I was going to crawl out of my own skin, if I'm honest. I felt so uncomfortable. I hated the feeling of food inside me. I felt like I was out of control. And I learned to bring in some compassion for having those feelings, to not try and chase them away, but to just be like, okay, I'm really uncomfortable now. My stomach hurts and this feels bad. I'm not alone in this. This is what people go through in recovery. The experience is part of the process. Just acknowledging how I felt rather than trying to push it away, and acknowledging that actually it's part of the process and that everybody who goes through recovery feels this, was really helpful to me, because it stopped me from feeling so alone and so, I suppose, freakish, actually. I felt like I was so different from everybody else. And that really helped me. I listened to a lot of podcasts, including yours, which really helped me, especially when I was eating, because it was so hard to eat. It was so frightening. And I used to sit there. By this time, I'd learned how to cry, which I hadn't done before. And I used to sit there crying, eating, and either watching YouTube podcasts or listening to a podcast to try and keep my mind focused on recovery and why I was doing it, rather than allowing the fear and the ED voice to overwhelm me. I tried to bring in distraction for after I'd eaten, to, again, try not to focus on the guilt, because that's immense, isn't it? That's so hard after you've eaten. And again, compassion for, I'm feeling guilty right now, and that's because I'm in recovery, because I have an illness. And if recovery was easy, then nobody would need to recover, would they? A lot of bringing in self-compassion, learning to, when the critical voice came in, learning to say, hey, hang on, that wasn't kind, and trying to bring something more neutral in. I felt I couldn't be loving to myself. I couldn't say nice things, but I could say neutral things. And that's so much nicer than really mean things. I started doing that a lot more and focusing on that. Reading. I did so much reading for recovery books, yes, but also things like self-compassion books and all that sort of thing. I can't think of another one right now, but The Power of Now, being in the moment. That was brilliant. That really, really helped me. And Untethered Soul was another book that really, really helped me with how I was feeling so almost disassociated from the world. I'm super lucky that I have a supportive family, and they were really helpful and helped me have permission to rest, which was so hard. It was really, really challenging, but keeping on reminding myself why was really important. Having like a vision of who I wanted to be. I didn't say, oh, I want to be a recovery coach or anything like that, because I had no idea. I didn't even really know who I was. But I wanted to be free. I wanted to be less anxious. I wanted to have confidence. I wanted to stop hating myself. So those things I knew I did want. And I also knew the things I didn't want, and that helped as well.
Thank you for sharing. And I think what strikes me is just like listening to you really describing what it was like. I mean, I really just appreciate the reality of you sharing so openly, because I think when people think about recovery, sometimes they do think, well, maybe there's going to be a bit of stress around the meal time, or I guess the reality is it's like an absolute overhaul of your life, isn't it? From when you get out of bed in the morning to when you go to bed at night, you were thinking, focusing in such a different way to how you had been before. And you were really helpfully embracing lots of tools to help with that. Those difficult feelings were coming, weren't they? Like you said, you were almost wanting to crawl out your skin, but leaning into that, giving yourself that self-compassion, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube, reading books, obviously having your coaching, all of those things together, your supportive family, all those different threads in a way were so important to be able to kind of keep nudging you, I guess, heading in the right direction, because if it would have been really understandable to want to give up, I'm sure, many times.
Oh, many, many times I wanted to give up. I really did, especially when I started to get a lot of like physical side effects, a lot of physical discomfort. I got really bad edema and my whole body swelled up really quickly to the point where I could barely walk. It hurt. It was physically very, very painful. I couldn't wear my rings. I couldn't even wear my wedding ring. Every part of me hurt. And that was really hard. I was exhausted, which was really hard. Like, I couldn't work out to begin with why, when I was eating more, was I more tired? It didn't make any sense in my head until I realized, and Victoria helped me realize, that my body was actually helping me by giving me the edema, which made me unable to do the exercise, unable to do all the, not just the actual exercise, but the low level movement as well, the constant pottering around doing this and that and this and that all the time, because that's actually a really big thing as well, isn't it? And the tiredness, that both of those serve to have me flat out on the sofa, really not doing, which was really helpful and really frustrating, particularly as, although I did read and I did watch things, my focus was just horrendous. I would read the same page 10 times because I just couldn't concentrate on anything. And it felt like the days were dragging on, but constantly trying to remind myself of why, and my family reminded me of why. That was really helpful. And then, of course, there's the digestive issues, which I don't know anybody that hasn't had, and they were horrendous. And that made me want to stop lots of times. But I kind of felt, although I wanted to stop, I'd got this far. I didn't want to go through what I'd gone through again. I wasn't going to stop and then start again, because that would just be too awful to think about.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly challenging. And I guess for someone who was super active all the time before, yeah, probably being exhausted and having edema, having to sit on the sofa was probably your absolute worst nightmare at the time.
Yes, that was putting it mildly. I think I was quite grumpy.
And what about the emotional side of things? Like, I guess in those early stages, you're feeling a lot of intense emotion around eating, around the more kind of symptom-based stuff, the changes in your body. I'm thinking once you started to move through that a little bit, I'm guessing as well, you're probably starting to get in touch with feelings and that you'd never, probably hadn't felt for many years. Yes. So could you say a bit about that? Because I think this is something as well that's very hard for people to understand, isn't it? I think pre-recovery.
Yeah, I didn't know how to feel a feeling. Every time something came up that I didn't want to feel, I restricted. to stop feeling. And it was very, very effective until it wasn't, until the feelings got too much. It was like they built up and built up and built up. I think my first therapist said, imagine it's a balloon, and every time you have a feeling, you're putting a breath of air into the balloon, and eventually the balloon bursts. And that's kind of what happened. And no amount of restriction would stop the feelings. I had a lot to process. I had a lot to learn about. And it was a case of, again, bringing in self-compassion, bringing in, it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to cry, because I'd never believed that was okay, and allowing myself to do that. And trying to uncover why the eating disorder had served me, what it had been there for in the first place, and why it continued to serve me for so long, because the original reasons morph and change over time as you change and grow. And it was all about unpicking, why am I so afraid of gaining weight? What does that mean? What does it mean if I gain weight? And to me, it was, well, I won't be accepted. And what does that mean? Then I'll be all alone and I won't be loved. And so it was getting to underneath the surface, the reasons of, why are you afraid of this? What's going on? And just getting right back to I just want to be lovable. I want to be accepted. I don't want to be rejected. And learning that where those feelings had come from in the first place and why they were there, and what needs had I had, particularly in childhood, that hadn't been met for one reason or another, from my own conditioning, others' conditioning, my parents' conditioning. There's no blame anywhere, but quite simply, I didn't have all my needs met. Learning to give the small, little, scared version of me permission to feel, permission to be herself, and to, I suppose, reparent myself, to bring in love, compassion, acceptance, internal validation. And this was a big one for me, bringing in loving boundaries for myself as well, to not allow myself to live, I suppose, in victim mode, that the world was happening to me and I had no control, which is what I thought, but it's not at all true. The world happens for me and I get to create, but I didn't know that then. So learning that and just uncovering bit by bit as each thing, because you can't do it all at once at all. That's just too much. So each little thing that came up, just working on that one thing. And as I said, I read The Power of Now and reminding myself to keep coming back to now. I don't need to worry about, what is my body going to look like in 12 months' time? What if all my friends reject me because I haven't been to the gym for so long and they don't want to know me anymore? And all the catastrophizing and future tripping wasn't helping me at all, because they were just stories I was creating. I don't know what the future's going to bring. So keeping on dragging myself back to the moment rather than just worrying about everything else and the bigger picture, and just taking things hour by hour. And another thing that Victoria taught me was to celebrate every single win, every single step I did, because our brains love praise so much, just like children with their sticker charts and my puppy with her treats. They love praise, and we still love praise even when we're adults. To praise yourself, you start rewiring your brain to want to do those actions more because they feel good, because you're praising yourself.
You're true. And so much more reliable than waiting for someone else to give that to you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Hearing all of that, Julia, as well, sounds like coming back to the present moment was very helpful, just doing it bit by bit. Yes. And I'm guessing such a shift, and I'm wondering about confusion as well with identity, because of, I guess, who you thought you were before you embarked on the recovery road. And as you started to rediscover new aspects of yourself, I'm sure that was quite thrilling in some respects, but also a bit confusing and scary as well.
Yeah, all of those. It was initially, I suppose, just terrifying. That was my main thoughts about it. I really didn't know who I was. I didn't know what food I liked. I didn't know what things I liked to do because I'd never really done things for myself. I'd done the things I thought I should do rather than things that I enjoyed. And I always asked other people what they wanted to do rather than said what I wanted to do because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was so scared and so confused because, as I said, I didn't know. I had no idea. So it was just a case of trying lots of things, trying different things, noticing things that other people did and seeing if, like, does that look nice? Does that not look nice? So I did a lot of people watching, which sounds really strange, but to see what I liked. I didn't even know what clothes I liked, actually. About a year ago, I actually got a stylist to help me find what I liked because I realized that I'd been wearing what my mum liked, what my mum had told me that was nice, and things that I'd liked. She told me that they didn't suit me, or she used a word once, which I've never forgotten. I didn't even know what it meant at the time. I had these beautiful DM boots with embroidered red roses going up them, and they were quite tall, and I loved them. And I'd saved and saved and saved for them, and I got them, and I put them on, and she went, "You look vampish, take them off." And so I never really wore them again. And I now have a lovely pair of DM boots that I wear all the time. And a lot of things that I liked, I never allowed myself to do. So it's been the rediscovering of who I am. And to begin with, that was terrifying. And I was like, what if I'm a bad person? What if I turn out like this person? And I was so scared. But the truth is, the essence of who you are doesn't change. So I'm still a very gentle person. I'm still a very loving person. I'm still a very compassionate person. I still love dogs. I still love nature. All those things are still there. They're still the same. But I got to discover all sorts of new things about me as well. Through trial and error, I've tried lots of foods that, quite frankly, I never want to try again. And lots of foods that I told myself I didn't like that I actually love. And I'm so pleased they're part of my life now. I've got friends that I never thought I would have had anything in common with and didn't think they were my kind of people. And friends that I used to think were amazing people who I don't really have much in common with now and I don't spend much time with. As I've changed, everything around me's changed. It is exciting. It gets to be really exciting.
And what about your relationships? Because I'm thinking your relationship, we were just talked there about friends, but I'm thinking, I'm sure there's been some shifts in your relationship with your husband.
My goodness, how X-rated is this podcast? Yes, huge changes in my relationship with my husband. He had never known me without an eating disorder. We met when I was 18 and we've been together ever since. And our relationship has had highs and lows, like most relationships do. But for, I suppose, the majority of it, we kind of rubbed along okay. We weren't really close. We didn't share a lot together. Physically, I pushed him away a lot because I suppose I had no sex drive at all in the eating disorder. I mean, why would my body make me want to have a sex drive when I didn't even give it enough to eat? And I was very closed off. I was very secretive. I lied a lot. I saw a lot of negatives in him. I used to focus on the annoying things he did. To be quite honest, I'm amazed he stayed with me because I think I must have been quite difficult. And things have changed now because I've trained my brain to not be so negative and focus on the positive. And so now I focus on the things I love about him. He still never puts his keys away, never. He still leaves things out all the time and he still does the annoying things, but they don't annoy me anymore because he is an incredible man that loves me unconditionally, supports me all the time. And I can see those things now. I get to focus on the things I love, which has brought us a lot closer together. Our physical relationship is magic. That part of recovery actually was terrifying when I got a sex drive back. It just happened all at once. And then I was like, oh my God, I've become a nymphomaniac. I don't know what to do. Nobody talks about that. That's
so
like,
true. Yeah, not talked about anyway near enough.
No. I was searching for information on it. And I think I found one thing about, I think they called it sexy bricks. And instead of just having a brick, you get hit by a freight train of something. Anyway, it happened all at once. And that was petrifying for me. He was over the moon. But yeah, that also does settle as well. But we're so much closer. And I'm open now. I was so closed off and I just kept everything secret. I never talked about anything. And I would get angry at myself and shut him out for anything. Like a little example is a funny story about my trousers, which I've actually put on my podcast as well. Well, last weekend before last, we went on a walk and I had these quite thin material trousers on. And when I bent down, they split. And previously, when I was in the eating disorder, that would have been horrendous. I would have insisted we go straight home. I wouldn't have told him why. And it was just at the very start of our walk. So he would have been really confused. The dogs would have been confused. And I would have been like, no, I want to go home now. I'm not doing this anymore. It's over. And I would have not shared a single thing. And he would have probably got quite annoyed with me, which I think would have been understandable because he wouldn't have known what was going on. And then we would have kind of been sulky and non-communicative with each other for days until I suppose he probably finally relented and just let it go, because I would never have let it go. And this time I was able to say, oh, it's a good job I've got a slightly longer coat on. And then we were able to have a laugh. And every step I took, these bloody trousers ripped more and more and more until I had like one bum cheek hanging out completely, thinking, oh my God, thank God this coat comes down below my bum. And then I even went in the pub for lunch and he said, aren't you going to take your coat off? And I was like, no way. I was able to talk to him about it. I was able to say what had happened. And although the day was actually like one disaster after another, they were all funny and we were able to have such a laugh, and it's really memorable. And that's so different. So instead of me getting stressed and closing off and just shutting down, I'm now able to be open and honest and authentically me. And I'm not going to lie, the first split of those trousers, I got a voice in my head that said, that's because your bum's too big. And then I thought, well, my bum is my bum and it's not going to change and whatever. And so I just moved on rather than stressing and stressing and stressing about my body, which is what I would have done. Yeah, my relationships are much, much better. I laugh so much all the time now. And I never used to laugh. And I'm just able to be me. And then when I'm being me, I know that the people in my life are accepting me for me. Whereas before, when I was trying to be what I thought people wanted me to be, or who people wanted me to be, I always felt unaccepted. But of course I did, because I wasn't accepting myself. They couldn't accept me because they didn't even know who I was, because I never showed it.
Well, thank you again for sharing. I think all of this stuff just isn't talked about enough. I think sometimes we go on Instagram, we think, I'm just going to be able to eat the donut and food freedom, which is true, but all the little nuance, really, when you're really sort of talking this through about how your relationships have opened up, how you're much more connected to yourself, how you're feeling more authentic, how you can laugh, how you're just kind of more in the moment, you're experiencing your emotions, you're much more kind of flexible and spontaneous and able to go with the flow. Yeah, and more sex.
That I actually enjoy now, which I never used to.
Oh, well, Julia, thank you so much for sharing that. I really, really appreciate it, because I feel for myself sometimes. I've been recovered now for such a long time, and I kind of have forgotten some of those things that you're talking about, because I've been in a different place for a long time. And I think it's so valuable for the listeners just to really hear, because it's not so long since you were sort of really in those trenches, walking out. And I think that's just really inspiring and empowering and gives people a lot of hope. I really appreciate you talking through all of that.
Oh, thank you. I totally agree. It's not talked about enough. The actual ins and outs and the feelings and the weird things like relationships and all that sort of thing, and who you are, it's not talked about much. And it's so helpful because, as I said, I research everything and I looked up so much all the time. I never found things to help, like particularly with things like the edema and stuff. All I found was that, well, you might get edema for 3 weeks. I had it for 18 months. But I was like, well, everything says I shouldn't have this. Why have I got this? It was also learning to, I suppose, just be okay with what is rather than having to have an answer for everything. That was another big lesson I learned.
And I think, as for many of the listeners, like it sounds like for you, you're someone who, particularly before the eating disorder, really wanted things to be very black and white and very precise. You're very good at researching. It's been a bit of a challenge, hasn't it, to be able to accept what is a bit more.
Yes.
But it sounds like you're stepping into that more and more and finding more peace in that place.
Definitely. And being able to let go of the perfectionism, the people pleasing, the OCD behaviors. I mean, it makes me laugh now. I could not have the telly on if it was not on an even number on the volume or a multiple of 5. Why? I don't know. But it was really important to me. And now, if I turn the volume up or down, I just giggle to myself if it lands on like 17 or something. That I used to be so stressed if it wasn't on the right number. And all these OCD behaviors that had such an impact on my life just have kind of faded away, a lot with practice as well, like the perfectionism, allowing a cushion to be on the floor and stuff, starting that in little steps and things. And it's so freeing to not feel, I suppose, enslaved to all these behaviors. It's just incredible to be just me and free.
Well, I think you'll have to come back and do another episode at some point to talk more about some of these things. I think the OCD and the perfectionism, because I'm thinking as well, I know quite a few of my clients and lots of listeners will really relate to that as well, because I think they often coexist with restrictive behaviours, and not just restrictive, I think, across the eating disorders, but perhaps particularly restrictive.
Definitely. I think it's a way of feeling in control of everything, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in a sort of uncertain world, we will try and find some sort of certainty and safety, won't we? And it can seem quite ridiculous when we look from outside, but I guess at the time when that dial was on the multiple of 5 or whatever, it brought a bit of momentary peace, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And I cannot fathom why now. I just can't. It doesn't matter to me at all. But it was so important. Strange.
So, Julia, where can people find you? So let people know, obviously you've got your podcast and other things.
Well, my podcast is called Fly to Freedom, and it's on all the sites, channels, whatever they're called, and on YouTube. I'm always popping up on Instagram. It's at Julia Trehane. I have a website, which is juliatrehane.com. And just send me a message and I answer all my messages. So I'm always about.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I should make sure, Julia, that all of those links go in the show notes, and I should also link to our last episode as well. And I'll definitely be inviting you back. Really appreciate it.
Brilliant. And hopefully you'll come back on mine as well.
Yeah, no, love to. Okay, thanks, Julia.
Amazing. Thank you.
So I hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as I did. Do go and check out all of Julia's info in the show notes. If you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out, the Eating Disorder Therapist _. And for further support with your relationship with food, go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. If you're a professional listening, you may be interested in my eating disorders and body image one-day training courses where you can train online at your own pace. If you are a potential client listening, you may also be interested in my online courses, Breaking Free from Bulimia and 10 Steps to Intuitive Eating. All the links are in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast, I would be so grateful if you'd follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.